on Camano Island. And here at the Camano Hermitage, I'm overlooking the Bay of Port Susan and looking towards beautiful Mount Baker, covered in snow. Well, this week, we're back on to the Rubaiyat, and we are on stanza 37, which is short and sweet. Sweet here meaning that it's not quite as difficult to understand as some of the prior stanzas last week. So I'll read it. Swami Kriyananda, the editor of Yogananda's book on the Rubaiyat, will sing it, and we'll go ahead and let him do the paraphrase. It's quite short. Okay. All right. So let's be focused, be present, open our hearts to the ancient past, to the great Sufi mystic, Omar Khayyam.
Stanza 37. Fill the cup, what puts it to repeat? How time is slipping underneath our feet. Unborn tomorrow and dead yesterday, why fret about them if today be sweet? Paraphrase. Fill the cup of intuition with divine wine. Live intoxicated with bliss ever new. There is no yesterday and no tomorrow. Forget them both. Live in eternity, beyond all temporal categories, in the unending now.
Well, that's pretty short and not so difficult for even our minds to comprehend, I think. How do we live in the eternal now when we are beset with problems and duties and responsibilities? This is the great spiritual quest down through the ages. Saints and sages, devotees, disciples have all sought that pearl of great price. Now, there are millions who have thought in terms of the afterlife, doing what we do with today's ego consciousness and slaving in the world, as it were, and hoping for a reward hereafter. Well, that's sort of how the world works, isn't it? You plant your seeds, as our friends at Ananda Farm are doing these days in spring, and then you nurture them, fertilize them, water them, and sunshine helps them to grow, and you try to keep the voracious insects and nearby animals away from your little seeds so that they can grow strong and bear fruit. And so that's how we think. We think that if we are good bunnies today, we'll be rewarded in heaven after we are dead. Well, I'm not going to argue with that proposition. After all, cause and effect are the warp and woof of what we actually experience as human beings, mostly. Mostly, if we be good, good will come to us. Mostly, if we eat right, we'll stay healthy, etc. But I say mostly because, of course, karma, the action and reaction principle of the universe, is quite complicated, particularly if you are willing to consider the actions of a past life. So we could go on in that vein, and we should go on in that vein. We should think about doing things that are right, true, and just today. And if we want to think about our just desserts later, that's up to us. But ironically, it's more subtle than that. In the great Bhagavad Gita scripture, which makes the Rubaiyat look like it's written in Greek in relative easy to understand terms, if that's the phrase. But Krishna talks about how even non-attachment to the results of our good works is necessary, is useful. And that's kind of a paradox, a dilemma. If we are behaving the rules of right diet, for example. Don't we do that in order to have health? Well, yes, okay, fair enough. But when ill health, disease comes, are we going to say, oh, the heck with right diet, I'm just going to eat chocolate cake from now on? Is that the lesson? No. A certain amount of non-attachment, stoicism, if you prefer, nothing more grandiose than that, does a body good. Okay? But let's get back to this eternal now business. Omar Khayyam is pointing us in a different direction than just cause and effect, though he never denies cause and effect, the law of karma. He is coming from a deeper level of truth realization, as do all the greatest saints and sages, because the past is gone. There's nothing you can do about it. You can, when you get my age, over 70, I suppose you're forgiven if you think a lot about the past and how things used to be. And I guess one considers it the responsibility to pass on the burden to our children and grandchildren and all of our friends and anybody who will listen in the hospital waiting room about our past deeds or misdeeds, things we remember. I guess that's our job. But it is gone, and there's very little you can do about it. Swami Sri Yukteswar said the past lives of all are dark with shame. Forget the past. What you do now will pay dividends. But that's still putting us in the cause and effect thing. Omar again is digging a little deeper. How do we live in the eternal now? We can accept that the past is past. That's not so hard to do. What about the present moment? That's pretty intense. And yet, the present becomes almost instantly past. And if not instantly, whatever we're going through now will pass. This too will pass. The present becomes the past all too quickly. If nothing else, every night when we go to sleep, the burdens of the day, the troubles of the day, the pleasures of the day, if you will, are soon past. That delicious piece of chocolate cake that Padma had for her birthday, where is it now? Never mind. And so, what about the future? It's all in your head, dummy. So, you see my point? You see Omar's point? How do we live then in the eternal now? There are basically two ways to do it. You know, there's always two kinds of people, right? So even in non-duality, there's only two ways. If you get that joke, you're with me. If you don't, well, forget it. One is to focus the mind, to project the mind one-pointedly into an image or a word or a feeling that preoccupies the monkey mind. And so what is that? That's practicing the presence. It's doing a mantra, doing japa, Om Namo Shivaya, Om Namo Shivaya, Shivaya Namaha Hare, etc. And so that's an excellent way to focus the mind. To focus the mind right in the present, but not on the present, you see. So using a sacred symbol or a sacred mantra or a sacred recollection, a recollection of the sacred personage of one's deity or guru, this is to use the power of the mind, the image-making factory of the mind, the thought-making factory of the mind, to focus one-pointedly not on the present sensory circumstances or the present mental preoccupations, whether they be of the past, the future, or the present at hand, but to use the mind to focus on a transcendental reality. Okay? Of the two methods, that's by far the easiest for human beings. As Krishna says when he's asked this question in the Bhagavad Gita by his devotee disciple Arjuna, he says, the I-thou relationship, praying to God in form, name and form, is easiest for embodied beings. He says the focus on the absolute is very difficult, and yet it is a valid path, and it is the second way I was going to mention. How do we focus on the absolute? I've been restudying the teachings of Ramana Maharshi simply because that was my first path, and I am inclined in that direction to some degree. Paramahansa Yogananda was truly an avatar and represents a complete way of life, as do others of his category or stature. So the jnanic path of someone, the Advaita Vedanta, the jnanic path of people like Ramana Maharshi and others and his disciples, is very fascinating and interesting, but it's a narrower path. It's the path of who am I? But what I want to talk about is not self-inquiry, as they call it, but more being in the present moment and yet beyond, having the mind just a little bit reflective, the mind a little bit quiet, a little bit self-aware. It's mindfulness in one sense of the word, not in mindfulness in the sense of practicing japa or mantra is also helping towards mindfulness, but it's like I'm looking out over through this picture window, and what I see is this beautiful panorama of blue sky and puffy white clouds. I see the ocean, the bay, stretching out towards Mount Baker. And I can look out at that and pause, and without thinking of the features of the landscape that I see, simply receive that picture, okay? I can quiet my mind while I'm doing the dishes, between phone calls. Really, there's nothing that stops me from having the quiet mind. I don't need to think, who am I? Or, who's thinking these thoughts? Or who's looking through these eyes? I could, but I can just shut up. I can just be quiet. You see, the mind, we call it a monkey, but the mind simply needs to attenuate itself to become accustomed to being quiet. I can talk. I kissed the Blarney Stone decades ago, past lifetimes, but it's much harder to listen, isn't it? This is why Swami Kriyananda, in his groundbreaking book on meditation, Awaken to Superconsciousness, defines or describes meditation as listening. When you look up to try to remember something, the mind becomes still. It's the look-up mudra. I do it all the time. Where are my car keys? Right? That's all you got to do is practice the look-up mudra every day, throughout the day. When you look up, the mind stops awaiting a command. I don't know why people don't teach this. I'm sure I'm not the first, but it's a great technique to teach the mind to observe, to be still, and when you do, the heart responds. It's really interesting. Now, you could work on stilling the heart, but that's a little more difficult to do directly. Until you're a more advanced yogi, where you go, exhale, feel the heart become still, and the mind is still. There are only two ways to the eternal now, friends, and it's right here, right now. Okay, that's your lesson for the day. Go to it.